The farmers in sub-Saharan Africa are among the most climate vulnerable communities on the planet, and they're also the least responsible for its impact. Global extreme poverty is increasingly concentrating in this single population, particularly amongst women and youth farmers. And the effects of global climate change on rain-fed agriculture in Africa threaten really devastating consequences. Now, as many of you in the room know, just across here in the Blue Zone, negotiators agreed last week to this new loss and damage fund. We're quite excited about that development. We're also excited to see countries pledge money to it. However, we believe that there's a lot more that needs to get done, and we still think that we are ways off from where we need to be. These negotiators need to keep at the center of their minds the 2 billion people around the world who rely on smallholder agriculture for their food and income, and who are directly reliant on temperature and rainfall patterns, yet receive less than 1% of the global climate finance to help them adapt. Now, this new loss and damage fund has the opportunity to fix this imbalance. In order to do that, it must be designed to provide a complete and wide range of safety nets that directly respond to the lived realities of the most priority populations like smallholder farmers. We'd also like to see it include climate insurance in the wide swath of risk management tools that it focuses on, but focus more on the impact and value that it delivers to for the most vulnerable communities. Well, then at the household level, we hope that the loss and damage fund also includes microfinance products that mitigate specific financial risks for the most vulnerable communities, such as youth and women farmers. At the livelihoods level, we will discuss today how it should include weather and yield risk mitigation for vulnerable farmers. And there is sufficient evidence to show that when well-designed, well-targeted, and subsidized, climate insurance can go a long way in supporting smallholder farmers to protect their livelihoods. And there's more than enough evidence that shows that the current climate insurance market is not working for smallholder farmers. Now, despite being common across developed countries, insurance products for smallholder farmers offer minimal protections, and they're rarely subsidized, despite what we see happening in more developed markets. Across sub-Saharan Africa, less than 3% of smallholder farmers have access to formal insurance coverage, and only 1% of agriculture premiums are subsidized, versus 57% in the US and 46% globally. Now, One Acre Fund is one of the largest social enterprises servicing smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, currently reaching over 1.5 million farmers through our core agri-finance program, and an additional 3 million farmers through public and private partnerships across 9 markets. As a nonprofit and as a farmer-focused organization, we see the next frontier of our work being just spending more time resolving the disparities we see in the climate insurance market. And with that, I have the deep pleasure of announcing One Acre Fund's plan to establish One Acre Fund Re. One Acre Fund Re will create a more sustainable way to absorb climate adaptation finance and increase premium subsidies to farmers. It will allow us to more actively participate in the development and pricing of climate insurance products. Third, it will channel profits back to farmers while creating a sustainably financed program. But more importantly, it will deepen climate resilience and access to finance for the 10 million smallholder farmers we will serve by 2030. And we hope that by doing this, we'll be able to transform the wider market. We want to pause and take a moment to thank the partners that have helped us get to this stage. And that includes the International Finance Corporation, the US International Development Finance Corporation, and the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. And with that, I would like to hand over, thank you. With that, I'd like to hand over to Ange Chitate, who's the COO of the Africa Risk Capacity, who we're partnering with to host One Acre Fundry.
I'm sorry, I think that the applaud is not big enough. This is the launch. Thank you. Thank you, Doreen, for the, I think, comprehensive introduction. I'm from Africa Risk Capacity. We are an entity that was set up to assist governments in Africa to prepare, plan, and respond to climate disasters. We are a development insurer, non-profit insurer, and we are so proud to be part of this partnership with One Acre Fundry. As the host of the reinsurance business, we will host the business to provide reinsurance for smallholder farmers. As you all know, the losses that we have faced with smallholder farmers from climate disasters have grown sevenfold since the 70s. It's major. It is time to make a difference and shift the needle. So as ARC, we are here to provide our experience in reinsurance and insurance. We have a meso micro product which we offer for smallholder farmers in Africa to about 40 countries as a whole, and we cover most of the countries that One Acre Fundry will be covering. So it is a very, I think, good partnership that we are delving into. And also, because we have a balance sheet already that is strong enough to host the One Acre Fundry, we are able to provide adequate capital and support for the business. And also, we already have partnerships with the reinsurance markets, so it really is a turnkey partnership for them. And we also have experience and skills in parametric insurance and reinsurance, which will allow us to, I think, change the needle in terms of food security for smallholder farmers and empower the local insurance companies on the ground to effectively provide insurance for the different communities. So thank you, partners, for this partnership and for your attendance, and we look forward to a partnership that is building food security for the people on the ground in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ange. We are quite excited about our emerging partnership with ARC. Now, I know everyone is very excited about the panel, but to get us started, we wanted to bring the direct voices of the farmers that we work with. You're going to see a brief 2-minute video of farmers from Malawi talking about how they work with us to mitigate the risks they face. Thank you.
Sinthawanyengo kwatibweretsa mavuto ochuluka tingati kumbali ya kumundayi ndimene kwatibweretsera zovuta zambiri.
Namondera kwa chonji zatikhuza kwambiri fa kuti pamene timakulolera zaka zonse chaka chino zosiyana.
Mvula itayamba kuchepa kupita kumundaso unapezekanso kuti chimangaso charani chapita.
Kusintha kwa nyengo kunena kuti panga thandizo kuti tilowe ku One Acre Fund. Chifukwa chani fa nyengo zimavumba mosiyana-siyana eti. Zikatigwera ngati mmene zatigwerera za cycle Friday, One Acre Fund imatipasa chipepeso.
Chifukwa choti zokolola zathu zambiri zakukoloka zapita ndi madzi. Zina zomwe zinatsalazo sikutinso zinatakasuka ayi. Member wina aliyense wa One Acre Fund anandi andrama.
Tinasangala ndi mmene vuto lathu latigwera.
Ndipo timaona kuti ife ndiye tili ndi bwezi lokhazikika ndithu ndipo lodalirika. Ndipo One Acre Fund tikuona phindu lochuluka. Pano patu mapulani amene ndikulingalira ndikuganiza kuti pamene tiyambe kulima ndikuyenera kulima moyikapo mtima ndithu.
Ndipo mulimi mfo choti timapezamo phindu ndife tukakamiramu sitingangosiya. Ifeyo ndosangalala ngati a One Acre Fund eti chifukwa chonena kuti a One Acre Fund samatisiya ayi.
I would now like to invite Felicia Jackson, a renowned Forbes journalist, to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to say how privileged I feel to be part of this conversation. We all know how important the food system is in addressing climate change and food insecurity. And while the discussions are going on around climate finance, we have to find a way of bringing action to the ground. So I would like to invite our first panelist to come to the stage. I'd like to ask Andrew Moudet, Lead of Agri, SME and Innovative Finance at the African Development Bank. Thank you. And Johannes Borkert, the Global Head of Risk and Resilience at One Acre Fund. Now, we've seen the video, we've seen what happens on the ground. We've seen that insurance is a way of building resilience. But I think what I really want to know about, Andrew, if I can turn to you, what are the opportunities that you're seeing to actually have impact on the ground? Oh, sorry, I was supposed to give you a microphone. I apologise, everyone. Not at my best.
Thank you very much for the question and for the invite, and congratulations for the launch of our One Acre Fund Re. We at the African Development Bank are quite excited about it actually, and maybe I'll have a chance to mention exactly why later. But let me turn to your question. I think you're asking from the point, what are the opportunities we see for such an instrument for smallholders? I think we just saw a very interesting video showing farmers themselves actually lauding the importance of insurance, of the service that One Acre. Actually, I don't believe they talked about insurance, so this gives me the plug to do it for them. But they were talking about the importance of the service that an organization that like One Acre brings, which is aggregating them, and why this service is especially important because of the climate risks that they face. And you had one of them say, I just can't stop farming. So they might not want to stop farming, but if they get hit with certain types of, this is Malawi, I guess, was it Cyclone Idai, or, there are droughts. A couple years ago, they were hit by climate-induced locust infestations. Right? If we're going to make the farming system sustainable and resilient to climate changes, then the opportunities that exist, we're talking about loss and damage here. These are farmers who experience loss and damage all the time, and they experience it more and more. And I think the big opportunity, I think we should, look at some of the positives that have been coming out. And as you were saying, Doreen, a loss and damage fund being put, and it's quite significant. The onus will be for those of us who work closely to close to the farmers to be able to structure the support that they provide to farmers in such a way that it can access those funds. And really, with a solution such as insurance, if you think about a financial instrument, what better financial instrument than one that is designed explicitly to protect against risk. So if we tailor, I think that is a real big opportunity, is working together with those institutions such as the One Acre funds that have direct access and are aggregating these farmers. I think they'll present a great platform to be able to channel those loss and damage funds. Thanks.
Thank you. Johannes, can I ask you, One Acre Fund provides input into credits, a number of different services. How is bringing that knowledge, that expertise to the market going to influence what happens with the insurance fund?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic question. And sorry about my voice. It's a little bit, from all the talking last few days. Now, that's an excellent question. And to be honest, I think that because we have boots on the ground and many boots on the ground, that puts us in a very unique place actually to work on things such as climate insurance. But I'll take a small step back there and really go back to what farmers were telling us, that some of the most basic services, inputs, meaning fertilizer and seed, that is what farmers worry about. And the first question that we oftentimes get when we speak to farmers about, One Acre Fund maybe signing up to a program is, what happens if the season doesn't go well for me? What happens if there's a drought and I don't harvest anything? Will I still have to repay my loan to you? Will I be in trouble? And that's exactly, where sort of insurance comes in and why it's important for us to make sure it's available to farmers. I think part of that boots on the ground is that we collect a huge amount of data We talk to farmers on a very regular basis. We really ask them as a nonprofit, we ask them about what is it that farmers want, what is it that farmers need, and we try to tailor our very best abilities, try to tailor products so that they work for them, that they provide value to them. So the same thing applies when we work in insurance. And I think that's something that is oftentimes overlooked when we develop financial instruments, when we develop insurance products. Not with we, I don't mean One Acre Fund, but the sector at large. We think about loss ratios, we think about risk, we think about how we're going to aggregate as many farmers as possible, instead of asking ourselves, okay, what is it that delivers the most value to the farmer in the first place, and then working backwards from there. And I think that's where One Acre Fund is there to add value.
Excellent. Now I have a question for both of you, which is, we know that we've got the loss and damage fund, but you mentioned, Johannes, this issue of, insurance as a whole does tend to look at things on a more macro scale. How do you see, what would you like to see in an agreement on the loss and damage fund in terms of translating how things should work on the ground? Obviously, apart from microinsurance, which is a given.
I'm going to pass that one to Andrew first to talk about Acre a little bit, because I actually think that you guys are moving in that direction.
Thanks for the plug. But let me try and come to that through try and think through your question. And when they set up this fund, I imagine that they have set it up based on a set of principles, what loss and damage is, and these funds will have to flow probably according to some criteria that demonstrates that the investments or the projects that it's supporting are actually helping with the principles of loss and damage, right? So if that is the principle, then an instrument or an initiative that can very clearly be shown to be supporting loss and damage. If you look at what loss and damage is about, losses to agricultural production counts within losses. Damage that might occur to whole crops, or even to the infrastructure that is supporting the development, that is loss and damage. So it should not be too difficult to articulate these types of climate insurance projects. But how exactly do you go about doing it, and how do you do it well so that it's sustainable? And this is where maybe I can talk a bit about Acre. This is the Africa Climate Risk Insurance Facility for Adaptation. This was a $1 billion catalytic climate fund to be able to provide support to the players in the ecosystem that are developing climate insurance solutions for agriculture, starting from the farmer level, farmers, livestock keepers, to the meso level, as you're talking about, Doreen, which is all of those players that need to support aggregators such as One Acre Fund, and to the macro level. And so this facility, we're working with the primary insurers. This is a key focus to make sure we build their capacity to better be able to protect. Some of you might be familiar with some of the climate insurance products out there, and maybe Johannes, one of the reasons that you're setting up the One Acre Re Fund is because you found that in providing climate insurance to your farmers, those were either too expensive or are not tailored in the right way. So how do we solve this? And I think what Acre is trying to do, there are three key principles that we are focused. One of them is aggregation. Insurers are not afraid of risk, and this is what they do. But insurers are reluctant to deal with small risk. They need volume. Right? And volume in the farming system or in the agri-food system happens around aggregation units or aggregators. We'll see One Acre Fund has 1.9 or close to 2 million farmers. That is a huge aggregation pool. You bring that business to an insurer, and they'll start figuring out how to deal with that risk, right? So aggregation, and one of them is agricultural climate risk is heterogeneous. It occurs across space. So you need to be able to have insurers share space across countries. That's another, but a key one is to build that primary industry capacity. So I think this is why we see One Acre Re Fund as very compelling, very aligned in its approach to really deliver relevant solutions to farmers and to support the primary insurance industry to grow.
Johannes, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think just very shortly, but I think exactly as Andrew said, really using loss and damage processes to bring in the private sector and the insurance industry, I think is key. I think, you know, and if I think about, I'm German, you know, we love insurance. I think the proposal to a German government to put in money into loss and damage processes that might also pull in their own reinsurance sector, et cetera, I think is a lot more, it's just a lot more attractive than saying, okay, here's a cyclone, just pay for the damages straight up. And to be honest, I also think that the efficiency is a very important thing to keep in mind. The insurance markets are set up. They have been doing the business for decades or sometimes hundreds of years in some countries. I think that's a conversation that is lost sometimes a little bit in these larger loss and damage discussions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I mean, I think you've actually touched on many of the answers to my next question, which is actually about identifying the challenges that there are to effective loss and damage on the ground. But I think what would perhaps be really interesting is getting your view on what we need in place in order to actually deploy capital effectively. You know, what are the structures? What sort of capital do you want? What are the specific things you do that make it easier for farmers to thrive?
Yeah, okay, so I'll take it a little bit back to just One Acre Fund at large. Because in the end of the day, you know, that's what we said in the beginning, and Doreen touched on as well, is that there's a whole suite of services and products that are at the center and at the core of One Acre Fund. So like seeds and fertilizer, for example, extension services. There is a reason why we have managed to aggregate 1.5 million farmers for insurance, but 4 million, you know, through partnerships, etc. And that's because we provide products that are valuable to farmers. In order to do that, in order to set up those, you know, just the services in the first place, the staff, you know, to get capital, in the end of the day, to lend to farmers, that's actually, I would say, the first step to make this work. You know, if we talk about making insurance work or climate insurance work for farmers, I would actually start there. You know, what are the things that need to be put in place that farmers really want? You know, for One Acre Fund and a lot of parts of the countries that we're in, it's not that we are aggressively marketing that farmers come to work with One Acre Fund. It's that farmers tell their neighbors about One Acre Fund. And in the end of the day, that's only possible because we provide things that they really want and that they're excited about. So I think for that, that needs capital. That needs concessional capital. It also needs insurance to come in to de-risk some of that. And I think, in my head, you know, loss and damage should also address those things. The loss and damage process should not just be focused on disasters after the fact that they've happened, but actually how do we build resilience before the disaster has come about. And that building that resilience happens largely through addressing some of those basic needs that farmer households have.
Excellent, thank you. Andrew, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe I would just say that building from what Johannes has mentioned, the loss and damage fund should not just address loss and damage, or not just address climate insurance, but the enabling environment for the insurance, right? So even if we say it's great, make climate insurance products that are targeted and are context specific to farmers, but do we have the right type of data? Do we have the right type of policy? And data really in terms of insurance is a huge constraint. One of the biggest issues to scale, because for this to be successful, it has to scale, is the cost of the premium. Premiums are always going to be extremely high the dirtier the data is. So really investing heavily in all systems that, you know, systems across the continent that can improve the design of contracts, I think is very important. And with data, I mean, I think, Johannes, another reason you've been able to aggregate as you have is, yes, products that provide value, but because of the digital infrastructure that you have to, and I think that digital infrastructure is important for a whole range of reasons, for data, for be able to collect data, but also from the point of view of these climate funds, let's say loss and damage, they will want a very clear signal that the resources that they're investing in are actually delivering that loss and damage benefit. So you need to have digital systems that are tracking and tracing where the money is going, what the money is doing to give that signal, and in that way, more funds are also likely to flow back to you.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect time to throw the floor open to see if there are any questions from the audience. I'd very much be interested if there are any members of the audience who are farmers who have questions about this. Please. Oh, sorry, I've got to take the microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Monica Yator. I'm a farmer from Kenya, of course a pastoralist, but now we are transitioning to agro-pastoralism because of the climate shocks and risk. So I'm wondering, from the 1 acre farm, how do you support sustainable pastoralism, given that there is a bad narrative about methane and the rest? Looking at pastoralism as a sustainable way of livelihood, how do you support us? Because we cannot do away with pastoralism. Thank you.
Oh, collect questions. We'll get 3.
Thank you so much. Christine Nabwami, a small-scale farmer from Uganda under ESAF. So when we talk about insurance, to us it is about what we have that can be compensated for the insurance that we owe, that we want to get. And at times we are affected. After applying for those insurances, we find ourselves that we can't produce to meet the targets, to meet the what we agreed on while applying for the insurance. So now our challenge is that at some point we fail to meet what it takes, and we find ourselves losing the more than what it would have helped with us. So I'm asking, is there any softer way of making it simple and much easier for me, a small-scale farmer, not to feel the heavy burden with the much help that I thought I would get with the insurance? Because it's one of the ways we thought would go, but it is somehow hindering us from applying for the insurances. So we are finding for that softer way, the software way that can engage us to see that at least it can be of much benefit and not a heavy burden for a smallholder farmer.
And I think there was a question just behind you.
Yes, my name is Mary Bekunda from Uganda, working for Dan Church Aid. We work with farmers. I'm just curious to know, and this goes to Johannes, what kind of modalities do you use to make insurance more acceptable to the farmers, but also affordable? Thank you.
Great. Who wants to take the first pop at that?
I'll go. I'll try. I'll start with Monica and Christine's questions. I think they're actually not too dissimilar. But so let me start with Monica's question about pastoralism. And I think it's kind of the beauty of the 1 acre fundery that we're setting up is that this is not completely just focused on 1 acre fund farmers that plant maize or beans or other things like that. Since it is at the reinsurance level, we're very much interested to open that also beyond 1 acre fund farmers and, potentially for livestock insurance, etc. So from our perspective, we're more agnostic, I would say, when it comes to the insurance part, because the mechanisms in the end of the day that work for the maize farmer, they will also be useful for pastoralists. So I hope that answers that question. For Christine's question, I really, really think this is at the core, actually, of some of the challenges that the African ag insurance market is seeing, and it's about that insurance premiums are placing a burden on farmers. That's, in the end of the day, I don't think we have a better voice there to be heard than that, because here's your answer of why the African insurance sector hasn't, covered more than the 3%, because it's a burden to farmers and it's not something that, provides a lot of value to them. So I would say, and then maybe in the next panel that can also be a bit more of a discussion topic, is a bit more honing in on that subsidy issue. When we look at the United States crop insurance scheme, or we look at Europe, or we look at Australia, or any very large, agricultural sector in the world, subsidy plays a huge role. There might be called different things. They might be called premium supports or something like that. But in the end of the day, we see that crop insurance schemes, as we know them from those spaces, cannot work without subsidization. And that is also at the same time how to make sure that farmers are not carrying the burden of very high premiums, especially when we are in a space in Africa where data is an issue and uncertainty is an issue. So premiums tend to be a little bit higher. It's kind of insane to think that the most vulnerable population in the world in this agricultural space, smallholder farmers, are the only ones actually paying market rates for those products. And everywhere else, they're subsidized to a degree that they're affordable. And I think that should give us also a pause, the way that Christine had asked that question. So now the last one, I don't quite remember the exact question, so you might have to repeat it for me. Okay, so affordable, yeah, I think of the affordability, I responded to that. And I honestly think the other part of it is, it goes back to that whole package of services, right? Like the way that the insurance becomes interesting to farmers in the 1 Acre Fund ecosystem, at least, is through a lot of trust that we build with farmers over the long term, providing products that work for them. So I would say it's, again, you know what I said in the beginning, we're not going in there and saying, you know, we have a great insurance product we came up with and now we're going to try to like make farmers buy it. It's the other way around. We're actually adding the insurance after all of the other services have been developed first. So, you know, it's, yeah. Okay, there's another question, but I'm also going to...
James, do you have anything to add to this?
Sure. So maybe just one packaged response. You know, my recognition of the value of insurance as a tool for development began with livestock. When I was working at the International Livestock Research Institute, and actually, you know, if you can, and this is pastoral livestock, so livestock that are moving around and with their pastoralists. So you can imagine a pastoralist, you developed an insurance product that is triggered by a satellite. How do you explain to them? This was a big issue, and then how do you make them pay? Because initially, given the resources, where the resources came from, we couldn't give that much of a subsidy. So we had to convince them. And there were some that were convinced. But in the end, we started asking the same question. Why? Because we could see the impact of it and the value, but only a small uptake because of the cost. So we started asking the question, why are we making these pastoralists in northern Kenya and southern Kenya pay the full cost when others are not? And so we began to make this case to the government and to our donors, and this is what loss and damage should be coming to do. And they provided a huge subsidy. So pastoralists still continue to have to pay a little bit, and I think that's important for sustainability. But there are ways, you know, even in challenging environments, when the product is good and it helps them manage a challenge that they are facing, I think they'll be willing to come in.
Fantastic. Oh, you want
Can I
to
add one?
There's a couple more questions.
I just wanted to add one note there, and Andrew and I had discussed it a bit before the session as well. And I think that's key here, because just throwing out the word, you know, subsidy, like we need subsidy support, that's actually, you know, I think only half the job. The other thing is that in some of these programs, like in the United States, they actually targets on loss ratios and like how much in payouts needs to be coming back to farmers in that subsidized scheme. In most of the markets we're in, even if there are subsidies, that doesn't exist. So I've been to a conference a few weeks ago where there was a sort of loss ratios over the last 4 years in the microinsurance space, and they were around 20%. And of course, for the insurance side, they were all clapping and we're happy about that, but that's not a valuable offer. Yeah. So I think when we talk about subsidy, that needs to be clear as well. It needs to be very clear policies, but also targets on how that subsidy money actually ends up with farmers and not with shareholders in Germany or in the United States or somewhere else.
And I think that's one of the complicated things, which is trying to get financial structures that have existed for a very long time that are serving very specific frameworks to actually work in different ways and work in ways that are positive for the people who need most help. I'm really sorry. We're going to have to wind up this panel, but we can have questions at the very end. I'm very sorry. What I think we need to know, apart from thank you so much for taking part in the panel, I think the thing we have to recognise is how this is a fantastic initiative, but there's so much work that needs to be done on so many levels and on so many different scales. And hopefully this is the beginning of us beginning to work on those. Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to invite the second set of panellists up to join us this morning. Aparna Srivastava, who is the Deputy Chief Climate Officer for the US International Development Finance Corporation, DFC as we all know it. Farhan Fasuhid, I'm sorry, I've got your name. Fasuhidin, Principal Investment Officer of the Financial Institutions Group at the IFC. And, of course, Rowan Douglas, CEO, Climate Risk and Resilience at the Howden Group. Gentlemen and ladies, thank you very much for joining us. I think, given what we were talking about in the previous panel, I think one of the most interesting routes we can take is actually to talk about markets and how they do or don't work for farmers at this scale. Perhaps, you know, Rowan, I could start with you. you know, you're a major private sector player. You're used to the way insurance traditionally works. You know, how do you think loss and damage funding can actually be used in an effective way to bring in the private sector, but also to put more resources into providing the support where it's needed on the ground?
Well, Felicia, I think it's a game.
Oh, I've done it again.
There we go.
Sorry, everybody.
I don't feel. First of all, before I get going with the main gig, I just want to congratulate One Acre Fund and the team for having the highest yield per pavilion square meter. It is. If this is indicative of the success on the ground in the 6 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, this is great news. I've been to some events so far, but nothing like this. So thank you. Actually, it's an expanding pavilion, isn't it? It comes and goes, right? It's like Concertina. But to your real question, Felicia, I think loss and damage is a game changer. And I'll explain why in a second. But I also want to explain why it's funny how a domain, and some of us have been in this field, forgive the pun, for about 10 or 15 years. And it's been quite a long journey to get it to a point of everyone saying, of course. And now everyone's saying, of course. And now the issues is how rather than if. And as Anne said, all the elements are already here. And the final piece of the jigsaw is actually loss and damage. It's not the only big bazooka that we need, but it's certainly a very important one. So we have, through One Acre, the ability to engage with the final mile, with customers and consumers. I was lucky enough to do a 2-year program of a supporting research program in the Philippines of mutual microinsurance. And I learned there how critical it was to integrate insurance actually with wider services, including finance, but all the sorts of wider services that One Acre provides, of which insurance and related risk management is just one, is key. So that's the first, and obviously, so you have a deep connection with your customers and with your clients. And as Andrew said, you have the ability to scale within countries and across them critically. The second piece of the jigsaw puzzle is, if I can put it like this, Angie's ARC's gearbox. ARC has been around for 10 years? Okay, and it was a dream for longer. But it's combat tested in terms of how to take the data, the mechanisms, and apply them. So this marriage, if I can put it like that, between One Acre and ARC is a dream. And it's great that it's been formalized through something called RE, which is super. But the final piece of the jigsaw is actually I think the Loss and Damage Fund. Because what we've lacked is a source of premium at scale that can generate the efficiencies of sovereign level demand for capacity through protection with connecting that with a local level of delivery. I'll give one example of that and then how I think it could play out in this domain. So the example is, some of you will remember, tragically, I think 2 months ago there was an earthquake in Morocco. It affected actually, as had been predicted, the more remote mountain regions in Morocco. But the government of Morocco, actually on their own bat, decided to buy a parametric program for exactly that requirement 3 years ago. Paid 2 premiums. I can't tell you what the premium was, but it was a tiny fraction of the payout, which was $270 million, which was paid within 2 weeks of the event. But critically, and this is the magic, that money came from global risk capital markets because the seismograph in the USGS said that it was big enough in the right place, came into the government in Morocco, and then was dispersed in part to the social security accounts of those people living in remote communities. Just as it was expected to. It was quite an unlikely earthquake. It probably wouldn't have happened in 3 years, but it did. And I think that's symbolic of what could happen. Fortunately, last week, some quite groundbreaking research was published by Cambridge. They bravely took on, a year ago, how insurance, broadly defined, could be applied in the loss and damage domain. And what it said was, the research showed, it did two programs, one looking at small island developing states and others looking at wider LDCs and climate vulnerable countries. For general climate vulnerable countries, and I would say those in this context of sub-Saharan Africa, basically every dollar of loss and damage funding could be translated into approximately, it varies a little bit country by country, risk by risk, but on average $25 of contingent protection, insurance effectively, through mechanisms like ARC combined with 1 Acre. Imagine that gearing. So the magic will be if we can liberate significant sums at that level of multiple using a portion of the loss and damage funds and then integrate and propagate it through the refined, specific facilities that can be driven through ARC and 1 Acre. So there are two proposals in this, and one of them is that every L&D recipient country, and we think there are probably around 100 in the world, should be allocated to begin with $10 million of pure premium to use on their primary, their priority requirements. And in my view, now of course it'll take time to build up that level of support, but why not the six countries that currently make up, I think it's six, have I been right? 6 countries that make up 1 Acre, is it 6? 6 for this, could be more. Yeah, 6 and growing. Let's make those countries priorities to go loss and damage fund and say, we will try this out. We won't use all of our 10 million on 1 Acre. We'll use some of it. We're going to use some of it for other priorities too. But that would be the turbocharge. And there's no reason why we just can't get on and do this. This isn't rocket science. It's proven. We've just now built things up. And I would have 100% success, confidence that the organizations involved could pull this off. So let's just get on with it.
Now that's a brilliant, that's an excellent story because of the way it deals with the aftermath of a disaster. But one of the fundamental issues we have is how do you build resilience before disaster hits? So Aparna, can I turn to you and really ask what your thoughts are on adaptation finance, how that can be connected to loss and damage, how it should be connected perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I'll just introduce a little bit about DFC as well. So I'm Aparna Srivastav. I'm the Deputy Chief Climate Officer at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Lots of words there, but we're basically we are the U.S. government's development bank, and we are mandated to partner with private sector actors that are addressing development challenges. Climate has been a paramount priority for our agency and for the Biden administration as a whole. I'll just paint a little bit of a picture on the climate side of things and how we're thinking about that, and then tie that into this question, because it's a really important one.
And could I just add, because
Please.
You mentioned talking about the climate question, bringing in food security, and it's so fundamental to look at these in unison. So if you could talk to that as well, it would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting because as DFC, our mandate is strictly to focus on private sector entities. We cannot provide financing to any sovereign entities. And so we really are demand driven in that sense. We have to find private sector companies like the 1 Acre Fund who are working on challenges and working with them to scale their impact and their work. And we've been really excited to be working with 1 Acre Fund for so many years. But it really is kind of a part of a larger effort that we've had within DFC to really center climate and prioritize climate-related commitments from the DFC. And just to give you kind of a scale of the work that we've been doing, so with climate at large, this year at COP28, we are announcing $3.7 billion in climate investments around the world. And that includes not only things on the mitigation side of things that are super important in clean energy, supply chain manufacturing, et cetera, but also food security, also water security, also nature-based solutions, and really kind of recognizing the wide-ranging impacts that the climate crisis is having, and therefore kind of the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed and adapted to. And so then on the adaptation side of things, our food security team is just absolutely phenomenal. And I might sound, a little bit biased, probably because I am. But DFC has launched a food security unit just a few years ago that made a commitment to deploying $1 billion in food security investments over the next 5 years, and we hit that target within 3. And that really kind of speaks to the level of ambition, the level of work, and really the whole of agency approach that we're taking to addressing kind of climate financing gaps and really kind of trying to move the needle there. On the question of loss and damage and adaptation, it's a super essential one, and I think given DFC's mandate to partner with private sector entities, the place that we feel we fit in best is really on the adaptation side, to work, especially with insurance providers, to work on projects exactly like this that can really help communities, help smallholder farmers really build that resilience to the impacts of the climate crisis, to reduce the loss and damage, to reduce the needs, to reduce kind of the devastating impacts that we're already seeing. I can maybe just mention one more thing in terms of how we're thinking about. But let me pause there, actually.
Okay, we can get to that. We can get to that.
Yeah, exactly. Gotta leave something else.
Farhan, can I turn to you now? Because, the IFC normally works on large-scale commercial investments. So what is the role of the IFC in dealing with smallholder farmers? What does it mean to you, and how do you see it, the role of smallholder farming in helping to develop insurance markets in lower middle income countries?
Thank you for sure. Good question, and thank you to the One Acre team for inviting me. I'll start with this tagline that I read somewhere. I think it was from Bayer that said there's nothing small about smallholder farmers. Not in their numbers, not in the challenges, and not the impact they can have in achieving the shared global goals. It's estimated that there are about 270 million smallholder farmers in emerging markets. If they pay a premium of 10 cents a day or $3 a month, we're talking about almost 10 billion annually in insurance premium, right? So it's a big number, which insurance companies can't ignore. If you look at in terms of how many do have access, so it's probably less than 20% actually have access to insurance, and in Africa, this number is probably less than 3%. So the numbers are there. In terms of impact, challenges, of course, are many. You have limited access to finance. You have limited access to insurance. The technical know-how is not there in terms of technology. Adaptation to climate is not there. Literacy levels are low. So, and these guys are dispersed, right? So it's not easy to reach them with insurance and other products. In terms of impact, it's agriculture is critical to economic growth, right? We've got, I think, agriculture accounts for about 4% of global GDP, and a significant number of this is coming from smallholder farmers. So, huge impact there. Now, from IFC's perspective, yes, we do finance commercial, large-scale agricultural, provide agricultural finance through what we call our manufacturing and agri-services unit. But we also have a wholesale approach where we are reaching small farmers through FIs. And this basically means providing, so banks and non-bank financial institutions, mostly microfinance institutions, that are operating in these smaller markets and are able to reach these farmers with microfinance and, of course, through insurance partners as well. So one initiative that we have, which One Acre is a partner, is the African inclusive insurance facility. The plan is to reach, it's covering 6 countries, and the plan is to reach at least 1.5 million farmers by the end of 2025 with insurance. We also have the World Bank Group's Global Index Insurance facility. It was launched, I think, in 2010. We've got about 13 million insurance contracts already provided, and it's provided insurance on agricultural investment of about 1.5 billion. So the numbers are there, and the approach we have is, as I mentioned, both commercial, large scale. And in that case, we also look at supply chain finance. So a lot of these larger corporates rely on these small farmers for the inputs. So that's there. And then through FIs, as I mentioned, we do that as well.
Excellent, thank you. Now, one of the things that brings up to me is agricultural subsidies, because we talked in the previous panel about insurance subsidies and the lack thereof. What are your thoughts on the role of subsidies and how smallholder farmers can be supported? Who'd like to take that one? Rowan, I know you've Howden's recently launched the Climate Action Trust. Can you tell us about that?
I think we're launching it, so I don't think it's quite launched yet. It's on its way, pending various formal approvals and things, not from us, from the relevant authorities. But yes, I mean, exciting. So I'll talk generally.
Yes.
But wouldn't it be exciting if insurers and others ate their own dog food and said, you know what, it would be, as well as giving support when events occur, as we all do, wouldn't it be great if a group of insurers and others clubbed together to actually support insurance premiums as a much more effective and efficient way of dealing with humanitarian and other issues? So there is an initiative on its way. Howden's have already done some of this in the past to actually subsidise and support insurance premium. And I would not be surprised if we saw something moving ahead that was seeking to fill a significant part of the humanitarian financing gap through business and philanthropy donating into funds to deliver premium support in, if I can put it like this, a tile in the mosaic of solutions that will be loss and damage. A beautiful, bright tile. And if our own industry has the confidence to do it and use its own money in this way, I think that'll give confidence to others that this actually, makes a great deal of sense. So, but finally, 27% of global GDP is spent on risk-sharing systems. We sometimes call it welfare. We sometimes call it social insurance. We sometimes call it insurance. We sometimes call it mutual microinsurance. Ultimately, we all, as taxpayers or as customers, decide what it is we value collectively, what we want to protect, how we need to behave to protect that, but also how to have a shared pool of capital which we all own. Insurance is the ultimate community product, and if defined events occur, if I reach 65, if I get sick, if I suffer a flood, I have an entitlement to that fund. And most of that insurance that we all receive, including me in a richer northern European country, is subsidized. Most of the insurance I receive is subsidized. So there is nothing wrong with subsidizing it, it's how it happens. What we're seeking here is to actually make insurance work within and between states. And remember, when smallholder farmers are being insured in the 6 countries that are part of the plan that we have at that 1 Acre has, it's not just those farmers who are being subsidized, protected, it's their economies. And in fact, it's the world food system. It's all of us. So why shouldn't we all combine to support the system upon which we all rely on? The fact that the person at the far end of the chain is the smallholder farmer in Uganda or wherever it might be makes no difference. We are one. So I'm all up for this because it's doing nothing more than insurance has done as the ultimate community product for the last 200 years. It's just making it work for the present set of circumstances.
I think that sounds amazing, and I think it also speaks very strongly to this issue of burden. Now, perhaps I can open the floor to questions from the audience. We have a question over here, and then I'll come next. So we'll take 3 questions because I think there are 3 questions.
I think so I'm Kurt Bowen from Semina Nueva. We do biofortification for maize in Central America and soon with 1 Acre Fund in East Africa. One of the things that to me is the most interesting so far at COP was a comment by Ugand, Vice President at the World Bank, that the biggest source of climate finance that is not being tapped is the subsidy systems of all of our governments. And I think one thing that to me can be really interesting is the political economy behind insurance. being from the US, I think that we have a place where the political economy of insurance is a net negative in many, many ways. And one of the questions for One Acre Fund and for all of you who are working at it from the top down is how can the successful use of insurance services mobilize political activism from the grassroots to push policy to change? Because it seems like one of the things at COP that we're seeing is everybody coming from the top and aligning in our recommendations and pushing governments, et cetera. But the role of the bottom to come up is a very difficult one when it's being facilitated by outside organizations. But it seems like it's the most necessary missing puzzle piece. And I'm curious what you guys think about that role of
I think that's a great question, and I think it's really important that we actually do address it, but there's two other questions we do need to get in as well. Did you have a question? Yes.
Good morning. Timo Gasbeek, Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. First of all, congratulations on the launch. I think it's super important that that insurance becomes available widely and that we scale it. I do have a question on the monitoring. I was in Uganda and Kenya in spring. I had a lot of conversations with farmers about insurance, and they had a problem with the satellite imagery analysis because NDVI is not an indicator for yield. It does not correlate well. So how are you going to monitor in a way that it's actually does not undermine the confidence of farmers in the insurance? There were farmers who had a good yield who still got insurance payout. There were others who had a bad yield who did not get a payout because the imagery said, oh, your NDVI is fine, but actually the crop was green, but there was no grain in it. So how are we going to make sure that the monitoring aligns with the required confidence level of the farmers?
That's brilliant, thank you. And then our third question was over here. Just this lady here.
Hi, I have a question about the resilience point that we raised before. So when we look at like parametric or indemnity insurance, so for me, I always think, okay, this money are paid out the moment that a specific event happens to cover a loss that the person has like realized. So how do we use insurance not only to cover a loss, but to build resilience? So how does that really work if we think technically? How can money be deployed in a way that are not only needed and used in the moment they are disbursed, but can also support the people to become more resilient?
So is this connecting to the adaptation question?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I don't know who'd like to go first, but we have questions around how you connect adaptation and resilience and, adaptation, loss and damage insurance and how you build resilience. We have a question about monitoring, and then obviously we have a question about political economy and how insurance can be used to drive action.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I can answer it as I see it personally. I'm not sure this is kind of an official answer or consensus, but I think in thinking about kind of building resilience, and I don't think it's quite enough. I think there's still a lot more we need to do to build that resilience. But I think the role that insurance can play in terms of reducing those losses is that when there is kind of a very, very limited pool of savings or cash or capital that folks have on hand, any sort of insurance subsidy that is reducing the burden of repayment of a loan to an actor like One Acre Fund, or anything that is kind of reducing the amount of money that needs to go out the door through the use of insurance will at least impact the economic resilience and kind of allow for kind of greater cash to be on hand for other activities or other efforts to build that to adapt. But it's not quite enough. And so I think maybe this is a little bit kind of rocking the boat to say this. I think insurance is absolutely a fundamental part of the question around loss and damage and adaptation and everything. But it is, as Rowan so well articulated it so well, it is only one part of the broader need around what's actually needed to build that resilience and address loss and damage.
Thanks, Aparna. I'm going to try and answer all three in 3 sentences. So insurance can help put some attention at the micro level, customer by customer. when we take out insurance, there are various things often we have to do to reduce the risk and reduce the premium. But actually, insurance is much more structural than that. So if everyone is insured, suddenly the burden of risk moves from lots of powerless individuals to strong economic entities. And if actually insurance is provided both by the public and private sector in some sort of combination, those entities who suddenly have to take the burden are the state and the financial sector. So structurally, if you want to understand why we can drive cars that are now much safer, if you want to understand why the scourge of urban fire in the 1880s in the West was transformed in 40 years, if one wants to understand why electricity became safe to use from the 1890s onwards, or to use a bit of irony, why steam boilers became safe and propagated and created the climate change we have now, it's because insurance systems created structural requirements for safety to make insurance premiums affordable, which put pressure on governments to do things they didn't want to do, because without doing that, investment would not have been realized, or that burden would have fallen on the state. What we've forgotten, to your point in political economy, is how insurance is actually a mechanism of governance. We've completely forgotten that. And that will be the power. When everyone is insured, it will create structural requirements to manage risk at a macro, not just a micro level. So to the gentleman's point, people aren't going to campaign for insurance, but what people will campaign for is security. And if insurance, broadly defined, which will necessitate resilience to make it affordable, becomes the solution. And to the gentleman who's just been on a trip to East Africa, absolutely, we need to get better at the issues of basis risk, which is the specific issue you're talking about. What excites me about the 1 acre proposal with ARC is that we're dealing with organizations which are absolutely on the ground, are combat tested, and I don't think will stretch the technology further than it can go at this time, because all of finance, all of business, and certainly insurance, is built on trust and confidence.
And on that note of trust and confidence, I'm afraid I'm actually going to have to round up this panel because we're running over slightly. Thank you so much for taking part. Farhan, did you have anything critical you wanted to add? Basically, if the panel would step down, I would like to introduce, thank you very much, James Mwangi, who is the chair of 1 Acre Fund, the founder of Climate Action Partnership Africa, and the CEO of Africa Climate Ventures. The man who is the reason we're all here. Thank you.
Firstly, Felicia, thank you for that very kind introduction. It is exaggerated. I am not the reason we are all here. I am very privileged to serve as the chair of the 1 Acre Fund board, a big fan of their work and the work with our partners to innovate in this way. And so I was asked to say a few words. I was unable to join the entire session, but I did catch the end of it. And I think a powerful thing about what you've heard described in 1 Acre Fund Re is this idea of we all know and we're all richly aware, as the loss and damage discussion richly illustrates, that a lot of the risk and the consequence of climate change has been visited upon smallholder farmers, hundreds of millions of them around the world. Mechanisms that allow us to think about that risk more structurally, to concentrate it and manage it. Exactly, Rowan, as you've said, to begin to create pools of risk that can then both be managed and invested against are a critical step towards developing real strategic responses to the long-term and entirely predictable impacts of climate change. And I'm thrilled that 1 Acre Fund is using its particular footprint and the benefit of its years of experience providing services to smallholder farmers to really begin to put together a mechanism of this kind. I would say that we cannot stop here. In addition to being the principal victims of climate change because of their vulnerable and precarious livelihoods and their exposure to the vicissitudes of climate shocks, smallholder farmers around the world are potentially the shock troops for climate action. They are the custodians of the land. They are in a position to not just limit emissions, but hopefully play a huge role in removing emissions from the atmosphere. And one of the things I'm proudest of in terms of the work that 1 Acre Fund and other organizations are doing is beginning to bring similar innovation to how indeed do we finance and underwrite innovations in boosting soil carbon, boosting agroforestry, and other interventions that allow smallholders to not just be spared the worst ravages of climate change, but earn an income from hopefully helping arrest and hopefully, we all pray, eventually beginning to reverse the impacts of years of emissions. So with that, I thank all of the partners who are part of this amazing intervention. I congratulate the team at One Acre Fund. Very proud, as always, to be a member of the team. And I thank you all for joining this conversation. And hopefully, we will continue not just to strengthen our defenses, but actually the best defense is a good offense. Let's go on the offense and begin to realize climate positive growth for smallholder farmers on the land. Thank you very much.